Hi, this time we will explain the plot of the 2018 film Rust Creek. The film follows the journey of a young girl named Sawyer, who is stranded in a remote forest after her car breaks down on her way to a job interview. While trying to find her way out, she encounters various characters including Lowell, a reclusive man who seems to have a dark secret. Meanwhile, Sawyer must also face threats from Hollister and Buck, who are involved in illegal business. Here is the plot. At the beginning of the story, we are introduced to a girl named Sawyer, who is exercising. Sawyer is a senior student at Center College. Shortly after, Sawyer receives a message from the company she applied to, inviting her to attend an interview on Friday at 7:30 p.m. at their office in Washington, D.C. Sawyer is thrilled to hear the news and immediately opens the email from the company, chooses a route, makes preparations, and heads straight to the interview location. However, since it is the weekend, the main road Sawyer is supposed to take is severely congested, forcing her to find an alternative route. She reset the GPS on her phone and decided to take another route. The route she chose took Sawyer through a rural area, passing through a very quiet forest. Although she was not very familiar with this route, Sawyer relied solely on the GPS map on her smartphone to continue her journey. The GPS instructed her to turn right after 500 feet, but the road turned out to be a dead end and blocked. Feeling trapped, Sawyer decided to look for another route. Despite the GPS repeatedly warning her to turn back, Sawyer continued on and chose to search for an alternative path. After some time, she finally found a three-way intersection and stopped to assess the situation. From a distance, two men were watching her, making Sawyer feel even more anxious and frustrated because the GPS on her phone kept malfunctioning. Feeling she had no other choice, Sawyer decided to turn back and use the manual map in the car to help her continue her journey. Her frustration grew, but she remained calm and focused on finding a way out of her confusion. Shortly after that, Sawyer stops and opens the map to check her location. Suddenly, a car drives by and stops near her. Two men get out of the car and approach her. One of them is named Hollister, while the other is Buck. The two men begin to approach Sawyer, who feels increasingly threatened in the confusing and dangerous situation. Hollister and Buck offered to help Sawyer, as if they knew she was lost. Hollister began to flirt with Sawyer by taking the map she had, as if he wanted to help her. However, as Sawyer is about to get into the car, Hollister pretends to return the map and deliberately stands in front of the car to block her way. Gradually, Hollister's behavior becomes increasingly inappropriate, making Sawyer feel very uncomfortable. Unwilling to accept this treatment, Sawyer begins to fight back and tries to escape from the worsening situation. Sawyer then ran and fled into the forest, while Hollister and Buck continued to chase her. Quickly, Sawyer hid behind large rocks, trying to calm herself while covering her wounds with the sweater she was wearing. To distract them, Sawyer throws her shoe in another direction. Fortunately, the action succeeds, and Hollister and Buck are distracted by the sound of the thrown shoe. After feeling safe for a moment, Sawyer continues her escape, determined to overcome her fear and convince herself that she can get through all the obstacles. As night falls, Sawyer finally finds a river. She stops to drink, tries to gather her strength, and then looks for a place to rest. Her chaotic thoughts begin to subside, and although the situation is still very dangerous, Sawyer feels a little stronger. With her resolve growing stronger, she prepares herself to keep fighting, convincing herself that she will survive and escape the forest. The next morning, at the local police station, Deputy Nick and Sheriff O'Doyle receive a report about a vehicle found parked on the side of the road with no driver. Responding to the report, Sheriff O'Doyle immediately checks the scene. Upon arriving there, he was puzzled by the abandoned car. Sheriff O'Doyle also found dried bloodstains, which made him even more suspicious. He immediately headed toward two men known for causing trouble in the area, Hollister and Buck. When questioned, Hollister denied any knowledge of the car's whereabouts. However, Sheriff O'Doyle remained suspicious, as both men appeared to have injuries that seemed to be the result of a fight, which further strengthened his suspicions. Meanwhile, Sawyer woke up from her sleep upon hearing the sound of a helicopter. She immediately waved her arms, hoping the helicopter would see her and come to her aid. Unfortunately, the helicopter did not notice her, and Sawyer was once again disappointed. She then returned to the river to clean her wounds and bandage them with socks to stop the bleeding, which was becoming increasingly severe. Despite her dire circumstances, Sawyer continued to encourage herself, determined to stay strong and hoping that help would soon find her. Meanwhile, Hollister and Buck returned to Sawyer's abandoned car by the roadside, took it away, and drove it toward a cliff which happened to be below Sawyer's hiding spot. Realizing the danger, Sawyer quickly hides, watching as they continue to search and hunt her. The tension escalates as she realizes that Hollister and Buck won't stop chasing her, and she must think quickly to survive. Sawyer then approaches her overturned car and finds her phone lying on the ground. After opening her phone, Sawyer sees numerous missed calls from her mother, who seems very worried. Meanwhile, Hollister and Buck find Sawyer's socks, which are still wet, indicating that Sawyer is not far from there. They continue searching for Sawyer and decide to return to the location of the overturned car, but luckily, Sawyer has already left. Sawyer then walks through the forest searching for a signal for her phone, but by late afternoon, she has not been able to get a signal, and her phone battery is starting to run out. In desperation, Sawyer decided to record a voice message to send to her mother, hoping to give her some news, but unfortunately, before she could send the voice message, her phone battery died completely. Sawyer gave up, not knowing what to do. She could only cry, lamenting her increasingly difficult fate. As night began to fall, Sawyer continued her journey and eventually found an abandoned hut. However, before she could enter the hut, her body was too exhausted to take another step. The overwhelming weakness made her unable to walk any further, and she fainted outside the hut. The situation grew worse, but she could do nothing except fall unconscious. The next day, Sawyer woke up to find herself in an unfamiliar room. She felt confused, but the first thing she noticed was her wounds, which had been neatly bandaged. Sawyer quickly checked the room and realized she was trapped. All the doors were locked tight, and she felt confined within the room. As she began to panic, she heard footsteps entering the room, and it turned out to be the person who had saved her. The man who entered the room was named Lowell, a drug dealer who lived alone in the forest. Sawyer, who was still in a state of shock and fear, immediately threatened Lowell with a knife she had found. Lowell, despite appearing calm, asked Sawyer to calm down and put down the knife. Although Lowell tried to speak softly, Sawyer, still traumatized from the previous incident and in a panic, attacked Lowell using a chemical substance she had found, which was commonly used to make methamphetamine. However, Sawyer's attempt to escape is unsuccessful, as her physical condition is extremely weak and her body is exhausted, causing her to faint again before she can do anything. The situation becomes critical, and despite trying to survive, Sawyer feels trapped in an increasingly difficult situation. Elsewhere, Deputy Nick arrives at the office and finds Hollister and Buck just exiting the meeting room with Sheriff O'Doyle. Upon entering, Nick asks if they are involved in the case of the abandoned car left by its owner yesterday. Sheriff O'Doyle responds that they are only handling immigration issues. However, Nick finds this answer suspicious and asks for permission to contact the owner of the car and continue the investigation. Meanwhile, Sawyer regains consciousness and sees bread next to her. She then realizes that her hands are tied. Lowell, who was nearby, told her to eat because she needed food to regain her energy and stamina. At first, Sawyer felt hesitant and embarrassed, but since she hadn't eaten for 2 days and 2 nights, she eventually decided to eat the bread. After eating, Sawyer began telling Lowell about her experiences, recounting everything that had happened so far. However, while Sawyer was speaking, suddenly the sound of a car was heard. Without thinking twice, Sawyer screamed for help, but Lowell quickly covered her mouth with his hand and told her to stay quiet. It turned out that the ones who arrived were Hollister and Buck, who were searching for Sawyer. The tension escalated, and Sawyer once again felt trapped in an increasingly difficult situation. It is revealed that Lowell is the cousin of Hollister and Buck. The two had come to Lowell's place to ask about the drugs that were supposed to be delivered to a buyer on Saturday. Additionally, they inquired about a missing girl in the area, but Lowell claimed he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. Hearing their conversation, Sawyer began to feel unsafe and increasingly anxious, as she knew that if they found her, the danger would grow even greater. Therefore, Sawyer started looking for a way to free herself and plan her escape. Lowell acted unusually, refusing to let Hollister and Buck enter his room, which made Hollister suspicious. As a result, Hollister ordered Buck to investigate the room further. Upon entering, Buck finds nothing suspicious, but Hollister's suspicion toward Lowell grows stronger. This makes Sawyer feel increasingly cornered and trapped in an increasingly tense situation. Meanwhile, at the police station, the state police chief, Slattery, reprimanded Sheriff O'Doyle for his unsatisfactory performance. Deputy Nick informed him that the driver of the missing car was named Sawyer, who had been missing for 2 days. Upon hearing this, Slattery becomes furious and orders Sheriff O'Doyle to resolve the case immediately, or else the state police will take over the investigation. The pressure grows heavier on Sheriff O'Doyle, who feels time is running out. With the threat growing more real, Sheriff O'Doyle and his team began working harder to find Sawyer and solve the case of the missing girl. However, elsewhere, Sawyer felt increasingly threatened and desperate to escape. The situation is nearing its climax, with both the authorities and her pursuers on the same path, striving to find clues that could save Sawyer's life. Meanwhile, the suspicions among them all are growing, putting Sawyer in even greater danger. Amidst all this, Lowell begins to struggle with the pressure from his two cousins, Hollister and Buck. As a lone man in the forest, he feels caught between his desire to protect Sawyer and the increasingly fractured family ties. Elsewhere, Lowell explains that he did not kidnap or hold Sawyer against her will. Instead, he was trying to protect her from Hollister and Buck, who are known to be dangerous. Lowell explains that he currently does not have a car, and his home is more than 20 miles from the city. If he lets Sawyer go, he is certain she will not survive at the hands of Hollister and Buck. Lowell plans to borrow their car when Hollister and Buck go to deliver the drugs to the buyer. He intends to take Sawyer to a safe place where the car will be left with her mother. Meanwhile, Sheriff O'Doyle, who had been reprimanded by his superior, immediately went to Hollister. Here, it was revealed that Sheriff O'Doyle was actually involved in the drug business with Hollister, Buck, and Lowell. Hollister and Buck act as dealers, while Lowell is the manufacturer. Sheriff O'Doyle knows that they are the masterminds behind Sawyer's disappearance. With the situation growing desperate, Sheriff O'Doyle instructs Hollister and Buck to find Sawyer immediately, dead or alive. If they fail, state police will take over the investigation and search for Sawyer in the surrounding forest. And if that happens, their illegal business will be exposed. Sawyer and Lowell grow closer each day. As Lowell teaches Sawyer about chemical ingredients, he also tells her to hide, as Hollister and Buck are about to arrive. Shortly after, they arrived with the materials to make meth. Sawyer, increasingly aware of the danger, grew more anxious but felt slightly stronger with Lowell by her side. However, she knew every second was crucial to escape and stay safe. At the police station, Deputy Nick was busy talking on the phone with his wife, who told her he couldn't come home to celebrate Skiving Day because of work issues. However, Sheriff O'Doyle suggested that Nick go home, as his family was waiting to celebrate Skiving Day together. Sheriff O'Doyle promises to finish his work within the next 2 hours. Hearing this, Nick feels relieved that he can finally go home. However, before getting into his car, Nick remembers something he left at the office and decides to go back unintentionally. Nick overhears a conversation between Sheriff O'Doyle and Hollister. From the conversation, Nick begins to realize that Sheriff O'Doyle is involved in all of this. Aware of the danger, Nick immediately runs to his car and takes out a gun to protect himself. But as he's about to get into the car, Sheriff O'Doyle approaches him and kills him to ensure that their illegal business is not exposed. That night, Sheriff O'Doyle instructed Hollister and Buck to dispose of Nick's body so that no one would discover what had truly happened. The situation grew darker, and their crimes became increasingly entangled in lies and murder. The next day, Commander Slattery returned to visit Sheriff O'Doyle to inform him that, due to the unsolved case of Sawyer, he would be taking over the case. Slattery informs him that his team is already on their way to search and comb through the forest. Hearing this, Sheriff O'Doyle feels cornered and panicked as his position grows increasingly threatened. In a hurry, Sheriff O'Doyle leaves the office and rushes to Lowell's place to address this increasingly complicated situation. Meanwhile, at Lowell's house, he was relaxing on the porch with Sawyer when suddenly they saw a car approaching. Lowell quickly told Sawyer to hide behind the door. Lowell quickly prepares his weapon, sensing that the arrival won't bring anything good. He doesn't seem to like Sheriff O'Doyle, and the atmosphere grows tense. As soon as Sheriff O'Doyle arrives, a heated argument ensues between them. Lowell and Sheriff O'Doyle face each other, and their argument grows more heated. Sawyer, still hiding behind the door, could only hear the conversation without fully realizing that Sheriff O'Doyle was involved in drug trafficking with Lowell and several others. The situation became increasingly confusing for Sawyer, who began to realize that she was trapped in a far more dangerous situation than she had imagined. The argument between Lowell and Sheriff O'Doyle continues, with the tension rising. Sawyer, who is listening to the conversation, grows increasingly anxious, unsure of what to do. She realizes that the world she has entered is far darker and more dangerous than she had imagined, and that she must now be careful to get out of this situation alive. Finally, Sheriff O'Doyle relents and ensures that the package delivery will proceed as scheduled. He then goes to meet Hollister and Buck to inform them to pick up the order on time and according to the agreed plan. Despite the tense atmosphere, Sheriff O'Doyle tries to keep everything running smoothly, even though he feels increasingly pressured by the increasingly complicated situation. Long story short, Hollister and Buck finally picked up the scheduled order. Lowell handed over the order without any problems. But before they left, Hollister felt a little suspicious after seeing 2 different shoe prints on the stairs. Despite feeling something was off, Hollister continues with his task and delivers the order as planned. And after they both leave, Lowell carefully returns inside the house. Inside, Lowell tells Sawyer to get ready, as he will soon go to Hollister's house to borrow a car. His plan was to take Sawyer to a safer place, the state police station, hoping to protect her and end this dangerous situation. However, while they were making plans to escape, Hollister and Buck returned to Lowell's house. It turned out they hadn't sent the order as planned earlier. They returned because Hollister suspected Lowell. As the situation grew tense, Lowell tried to speak calmly to calm Hollister and Buck, striving to prevent the situation from worsening, but the tension continued to rise. Lowell then asked Sawyer to heat the coffee that would be served to the guests. Sawyer immediately understood what Lowell meant, as what was requested to be heated was not ordinary coffee, but a dangerous solution inside the coffee thermos. If the solution mixes with heat, an explosion will occur. Despite her concerns, Sawyer follows Lowell's instructions and begins heating the liquid, but does so carefully, feeling anxious about the potential danger. Lowell then told Sawyer to move away from the heater and sit on his lap. As Buck approached the heater to check, a massive explosion occurred, releasing flames. The incident changed everything in an instant, triggering unexpected chaos. The situation grew increasingly chaotic, and difficult decisions had to be made quickly. Sawyer and Lowell quickly exited the house before the next major explosion occurred. Sawyer told Lowell to stand up and leave immediately, but Lowell struggled due to his severe injuries. As they tried to escape, Hollister was still alive. He emerged from the house with injuries but still holding a weapon. Seeing the situation, Lowell immediately tells Sawyer to run and leave the area, but Hollister, who is injured, does not stay put and aims his gun at Sawyer. However, Lowell managed to stop Hollister from attacking Sawyer. A fierce fight ensued between Lowell and Hollister, but eventually Lowell emerged victorious. As Lowell was about to execute Hollister, Sheriff O'Doyle suddenly arrived and stopped the fight. In an instant, Sheriff O'Doyle killed Lowell and then also killed Hollister, ending all the chaos. It turned out that Sheriff O'Doyle's actions were part of his plan to clear his name. By pretending to kill all the drug dealers, Sheriff O'Doyle was trying to cover up his involvement in the drug business he had been running all along. The decision to kill both men was a step to ensure he remained undetected, despite having committed numerous crimes. Meanwhile, in the forest, Sawyer kept running, regardless of how tired she felt, until she finally reached the paved road. At the same time, a police car drives by and stops near her. Unfortunately, it belongs to Sheriff O'Doyle. Inside the car, Sawyer tells everything that happened without realizing that Sheriff O'Doyle is also inside. Suddenly, Sheriff O'Doyle stops the car and tells her to get out. At that moment, Sawyer began to suspect something was wrong. As they approached the river, Sawyer realized that Sheriff O'Doyle was the boss of Hollister, Buck, and Lowell. Sheriff O'Doyle ordered Sawyer to get into the river. Once inside the river, Sawyer tried to escape, but Sheriff O'Doyle stopped her and intended to kill her by drowning her. With her remaining strength, Sawyer fights back using a screwdriver she had hidden in her pocket. In the fierce struggle, Sawyer manages to kill Sheriff O'Doyle, who is revealed to be a corrupt official. After that, with her body severely weakened, Sawyer crawls back to the asphalt road, where she is finally found by state police who were searching the forest for her. After all her struggles and sacrifices, the film ends with new hope for Sawyer. That is the plot of Rust Creek, which is full of tension and the struggle to survive. Sawyer is trapped in a dangerous situation, facing threats from various parties, and must fight hard to save herself. With her courage and intelligence, she manages to overcome various obstacles and find a way out of the terrifying forest. This film shows how a person's resilience is tested in an extremely extreme situation, with hope and struggle that never fade.